Good afternoon. My name is Michael Keating, and welcome to the discussion on globalizing the campus. This was supposed to be a conversation with two faculty. Fatima, who was supposed to be on the panel with me, is not here, obviously. So last night, I thought that rather than going through the conversation mode, I would instead make a presentation and then engage in a discussion. So the topic is how to globalize the campus. It so happens that this semester, I'm teaching a seminar on globalization in McCormick. Globalization in the sense that it's talked about in terms of political economy and also in terms of just the phenomena that's happening in the world. And the question is, what is the relevance of that to this campus? And how can this campus both respond to it and also prosper in a world which is becoming very quickly fundamentally different than the world that we grew up in? So what I'm going to do is, first I simply want to read one paragraph to sort of set the tone. This is from Thomas Friedman, who's a New York Times columnist and actually one of the cheerleaders of globalization, although recently he's become a little more skeptical about the benefits. And what Tom has to say is, he says, the long-term opportunities and challenges that the flattening of the world puts before the United States are profound. Therefore, our ability to get by doing things the way we've been doing them, which is to say always enriching our secret sauce, whatever that might be, will not suffice anymore. For a country as wealthy as we are, it's amazing how little we are doing to enhance our natural competitiveness, says Dinakar Singh, the Indian American hedge fund manager. We're in a world that has a system that now allows convergence among many billions of people, and we had better step back and figure out what it means. It would be a nice coincidence if all the things that were true before were still true now. But there are quite a few things you actually need to do differently. You need to have a much more thoughtful national discussion. So our discussion is not national today, but it's the world that we live in. Now, this may seem a little bit strange in such a small crew, but I'm going to start by talking about my own story and how I globalized myself. In the mid-1970s, I was a graduate student in a PhD program in Asian Studies at the University of Washington. I was actually interested in Chinese and Japanese philosophy, as it turned out. In the summer of 1977, I was offered a job in Japan to be a technical writer at Sony. And I thought, great, I'll go over for the summer, I'll have work, and I'll study Japanese. 3 years later, I came back to the United States a transformed person, in the sense that my interest in Japanese philosophy had morphed into an interest in what Japan was doing as a society and the Japanese miracle as I was seeing it firsthand. I actually had the good fortune to work in a Japanese startup company, which is almost an anomaly because we think of Japan as large, faceless corporations. I went into a corporation that had maybe 100 employees, very specialized technology. I won't go into that. But these guys showed up dressed in sweaters and sneakers, and everything was informal, except for one thing, which is that the workday never ended. So we'd start work at 8, we'd work till 6, we'd go to somebody's house who would prepare dinner for the bachelors, which I was at the time, and then go back to work, and then go out to the nightclubs. And then often would even get back on the subway after being out in the nightclubs and go back to work again. So I was 27 years old, so that was doable. But I did that for 3 years, and I realized that there was a world out there, and a very interesting and a different world. And when I came back to the United States, my first job was to help that company move their operation into the US. But then I said I need to get grounded in an American company, and I went to work for Bell Labs in Denver. And at that point, I started a completely different career in IT and systems management. And I worked for Bell Labs, then I went to work for AT&T. They were interested in my Japan experience, and I thought that they wanted me to sort of learn their technology, so that's why they put me in Bell Labs. And then they said, you'll go to AT&T and get involved in international marketing or something like that. But that was 1984, and what happened in 1984 was the destruction of AT&T. You may remember that at one time in this country we had one telephone company, right? But I was sort of a witness to everything that was going on at AT&T, and actually one of the most interesting things were the hundreds of consultants who were working, hundreds of consulting firms who were working in Basking Ridge and other locations in New Jersey. And I said, I like that line of work. So as soon as I finished my sort of work at AT&T, I became a management consultant. I first started out with a firm called John Diebold and Associates, which was the first really IT-oriented management consulting firm. Worked there for a while through the 80s. Then was offered a position with Bertelsmann. It was a German media company. I had a German boss. Bertelsmann was started out as a small Bible publisher in Germany. Survived through the wars of the 20th century. Ended up, by virtue of the fact that they had created these book clubs in Germany. And the interesting story there was that the founder of Bertelsmann, or say one of the contemporary members of the family who was running the business, had actually been a prisoner of war in America, in Kansas. And when he was in Kansas, he found out about American book clubs, and he said, I'm going to bring this idea back to Germany. And he instituted the German book clubs, and they amassed such a pile of cash that in the late 80s, they came to the United States, they bought RCA Records, and then in the early 90s, they bought Bantam Doubleday Dell and Random House, which were the two largest publishing companies in the United States. So, in effect, globalizing American publishing, or Germanizing, Teutonicizing it. So, once again, I find myself on an airplane traveling to Germany. My boss is in Germany. My job is to integrate the American companies into the Bertelsmann systems and also into their management processes. And that was fascinating work, given the culture clash between New York publishing and small-town Germany book club management style, which actually is quite effective, because Bertelsmann prides itself on giving managers a great deal of leeway, and they're also very open to having managers from anywhere manage in any of their global subsidiaries. So even though it's not truly a global company, it's one which has a great deal of international outlook. Then I passed from there and back into management consulting, and actually ended up as a partner at Boston Consulting Group, which is a global consulting firm, and it's also one of the responsible parties for globalizing American industry. If you think of firms that have had the biggest impact, the biggest intellectual impact on the globalization of the American economy, you have McKinsey and Boston Consulting Group are number 1 and 2 in that. And while I was doing that work, I wasn't thinking really about the long-term impacts on it. I was thinking about the world in the way that the Boston Consulting Group thinks about the world, and that is shareholder value and process and cost control. Those are basically the two guiding principles. We think about the more popular conceptions of globalization, which includes things like outsourcing or offshoring, those are really consequences of the desire to drive cost out of business processes, and also to create a global brand for companies that are able to do it. So I was very happy sort of with the intellectual side of the business, but I had the unfortunate side, the unfortunate position of working in the media side of the business because of the work I had done for Bertelsmann. And the reason I say unfortunate is because the media industry, particularly the music business, is filled with, I won't call them gangsters, but let's say people whose self-interest often overwhelms their responsibility towards their business. And book publishers are sort of intellectually on another planet. I mean, it's still, I was having a conversation this weekend about somebody we're trying to really figure out. We're talking about Amazon now wanting to publish their own books, and sort of bypass Random House and Simon & Schuster and say, is that a bad thing? Then we say, well, what exactly is the value added of publishers? I mean, we say, we want to go out and buy an Apple computer. We want to go out and buy a Lexus. Do we ever say we want to go out and buy a Random House? Or do we ever? Yeah, so that seems to me to be an industry that's ripe for transformation. So anyway, I did that until 2001, and then I had I won't call it a break with that world, but I really wanted to get into some completely different mode. And I took a package and walked from Boston Consulting. And I walked into a one-year a fellowship at MIT to look at, so basically the emergence of new business models and new communication models on the internet. And I actually, even though they weren't asking me to do this, I was invited to give a paper at a conference, and I chose to give it on the topic of how radical political groups were using the internet to meet and to create alliances. And the case I used were the Protestant gangs in Northern Ireland, and how they were using the internet to hook up with neo-Nazi organizations across Europe. So anyway, it was really my first taste of academia, if you will, in that mode, and I liked it, and I put it in the back of my head, but I still hadn't figured out exactly what I wanted to do. But then I started wandering. I wandered across Eastern Europe, and I had the ability and the interest in doing country risk analysis for say natural resource companies who were looking at places like Bulgaria and Romania and trying to figure out how to create sort of not risk-free but risk minimal investments there. So I did a couple of those reports, and then I jumped down to Africa, and I've been there ever since. I started in Guinea and then went to Ghana. I was in Nigeria, Zambia. Started out doing these country risk work, but then in 2005 I came to this campus, and Dr. Ed Beard, who was the former interim dean of McCormick, invited me to come to the Center for Democracy and Development and to make something happen. And the first thing that I did was to look at a grant for working with the media in Liberia. And Liberia since then has become my passion. I'm there all the time. I've had numerous projects going on there, and in effect have sort of taken all the 20 years of business and management experience and try to focus it on this poor country that's just coming out of 15 years of civil war and is very open to new ideas. And that's really where I'm at now. And I've also, on this campus, taken on different responsibilities. I have 3 jobs, actually. I work for the Center for Peace, Democracy, and Development as a project person, and I'm sort of co-director with Darren Q. I also work for Vice Provost Hyun in the Office of International and Transnational Affairs, trying to develop international internships for our students, and I also teach there. So I've got these 3 jobs. So that's how I got here in front of you today. And now what's the point of all this? Well, the point of all this was to put some background to the topic of how do we globalize the campus. We all use our personal experience as a model for others and even for institutions, and I'm no different. And I've tried to look at the topic of globalization and the impact of globalization that it has on American corporations, and ask the question, well, why shouldn't or why isn't it having the same impact on American institutions of higher learning? And I think there are a number of very, very interesting questions here, and maybe very controversial questions. They call this program Hidden Gems, but I like to think of myself as a rock in the shoe. So, and I shouldn't laugh at my own jokes, but the audience isn't big enough to, so I'll have to do that. Sorry, excuse me. So, but anyway, I started thinking, okay, well, what is globalization and what does it mean for a campus like this? And first of all, there's a fundamental difference between saying being a globalized organization versus being an international organization. An international organization is an organization that's based in one country but does businesses in other countries. And that's how most of American industry was through the 1960s and 1970s. The headquarters would be somewhere in the US and they'd have subsidiaries somewhere around the world. A globalized company, however, is something radically different. It's something which is unmoored, except for the minimal amount of legal work and perhaps tax work in one country or from any country, and is actually operating across the globe, across time frames, and essentially looking at themselves as an entity which is going where the business is, going where the best opportunity is to set up an operation, rather than saying, we're an American company or we're a French company. And there's a lot of controversy around that because obviously a corporation that had been an American company benefited tremendously from the American educational system for its employees, the American infrastructure for the development of its firm, and then for them to suddenly turn their back on the U.S. Seems to be a crime of some sort. And in fact, if we look at the demonstrations that are taking place in our country right now, these global multinationals are a prime target. But I agree with something that Jeffrey Sachs at Columbia said about this, which is that the corporations and the banks are not the enemy. They simply operate within the rules that are put down for them. The enemy are our policy makers, our politicians, who are essentially bought by these corporations to craft rules that are in their interest. But that's another matter. So, what do I propose for UMass Boston? I mean, it's interesting that when I first came here, I didn't know much about the place, and I was wondering, what its goal was, what its mission was, and Dr. Beard actually said, we are, dedicated to the city of Boston. Well, I say I'm sorry, that's not what he said. He said, we're dedicated to an urban mission. And I said, oh, great. So, looking at global cities. He said, no, we're looking at Boston, right? I said, well, okay. Boston has a lot of universities, but I guess, this one is going to be particularly fixed on Boston. But then I came to campus and I noticed the peculiar thing that it's really not in Boston. And in fact, if you look at it architecturally, it's even turned its back on Boston. But what it does look out on is the ocean. It looks out, and what you see are not the electric wires of the Green Line, but you see the vapor trails from Logan Airport. So, just in a sort of poetic outburst, I said, well, this is in fact, where, what we see when we come on this campus. We see a much bigger world than Boston, and the fact is that, we need to do that because our students, first of all, that was the other thing, where there are so many students from abroad on this campus who are either coming in as foreign students or coming from immigrant families who Boston may be a temporary spot or whatever, but they certainly don't have a kind of emotional attachment which would say that this campus's main mission is to serve the city of Boston. So, all right, so I say, okay, well, what do we want to do to globalize the campus? And I listed a number of items that I think are a starting point for a discussion. First one is, no one should leave this campus without a pretty good idea of some other part of the world. And what I mean is that there has to be built into the curriculum some kind of area studies focus that gives people a real taste of at least on an intellectual level another part of the world, but better, an experience of the other part of the world. No one should leave this campus without passing a foreign language proficiency test. It is beyond me that American students are so poor in foreign languages where everywhere else in the world students are bilingual. Everyone should have the opportunity to have a study abroad program, better yet an internship abroad where they're actually working. And again, I use my own experience in Japan as a kind of life-changing opportunity, even though it wasn't an internship, or minimally some kind of study travel experience to a foreign place. Everyone on this campus who graduates should have a basic grasp of global economics, particularly the effects that U.S. policies have around the world. So we have an understanding of the underlying dynamics that are transforming the world. Our campus should develop strategic relationships with foreign universities in all the major geographies, including Middle East, North Africa, and Sub-Saharan Africa, and also in non-traditional or even risky environments. We have to stop viewing the university as an extension of high school. It should bring students up against the hard edge of the world. This past summer I taught at the University of Liberia in Monrovia, which is a sad place. It was the infrastructure was completely destroyed. The faculty all left the country, but yet this is the major educational institution in the country, and it's the institution which is going to produce the next generation of leaders for that country. And everybody in the development world talks about sustainability, talks about, how do we move forward? But the university gets no support from the World Bank, it gets no support from any bilateral institutions, and it gets no support from the government of Liberia. So the question has to be asked, are these people serious? How can you create the next generation of leaders when your scientists go into labs and they have no equipment, no chemicals, nothing? When everybody's sort of forced into taking just a few courses because that's the only faculty that are available. So I mean that seems to me one thing that at least American campuses and hopefully our campus can begin to address through these strategic relationships. We should become a global brand. UMass should, if not UMass Boston. And what I mean there is that students do not necessarily have to come to Boston to get a UMass education. Technology makes it possible. We can set up temporary sites in, even if it's summer programs in Cairo, in Bangkok, anywhere we want to, anywhere we have the will to do it and the people who are willing to go and do it. We should become a leader in helping local businesses go global. We have an innovation lab here on campus, which has gotten rave reviews. It has great potential. But one of the things that we should include in that program is a way for local companies who are not global to start thinking about how to become global and how to move forward. UMass students who want to work in the periphery, and what I mean the periphery are the least developed countries. There's a tremendous interest on the part of students to do something good in the world. However, having worked in that environment for a long time, I see a lot of young people who have a lot of passion and a lot of good values, but who really don't bring a lot to the table in terms of skills, in terms of what they can really offer a country like Liberia or Sierra Leone or the Congo. So we should equip them, if that's their goal, if that's their passion, to go forward into the world. We should equip them with the managerial and the technical skills that are appropriate for the environments that they're going to work in, which requires us to rethink some aspects of our curriculum. Our campus should be a destination place for foreign students who want a global campus, not just an American one. And finally, to walk the talk, we should also offer a few courses in languages other than English. If you go to a French university, if you go to a German university, if you go to a Japanese university, particularly at the graduate level, you're able to take courses in English, right? Where in America can you take a course in economics in German, or a course in structuralism in French, which would probably blow your brain up. So anyway, those are just simply a few ideas in sort of transforming, what is already an international campus, in the sense that we do send students abroad. We do have relationships with other universities, but it's far short of the notion that Friedman's talking about of really how to globalize this campus. So, what do we need to do to get there? I mean, assuming that that's where we want to go. In management consulting, there was a term of art called reengineering in the 1980s, 1990s. Reengineering meant going into a company and looking at every business process and trying to figure out how to make that process more efficient, how to drive cost out of that process, and how to align processes to sort of cross company objectives. So it was both a top-down process and a bottom-up process, because companies that most effectively re-engineered their companies were companies like Toyota, for instance, who gave their employees a lot of leeway in redefining, how to do things, which was novel, because in the Industrial Revolution and everything that came after it, it was always top down. It was always scientific management principles. Labor was in fact an expendable item. It was simply there to perform a very narrow function and then retire until the next generation came forward. But somewhere in the 1980s, largely driven by the Japanese experience, we saw that involving the entire organization was a way of releasing a tremendous amount of creative ideas and energy. So in order to globalize our campus, we may want to re-engineer our campus, or we may have to re-engineer our campus. And I don't know, I mean, should we consider our students as our employees or or where customers, that's right. And involving customers too was a great innovation in reengineering as well, right. But anyway, the beginning of the reengineering process starts to look at the inputs, which in business is money, ideas, technology, management skills, infrastructure. I mean, these are the inputs that you start to analyze, and you look at all of your processes and you say, okay, well, how can we drive cost? How can we improve innovation? Here, the question is, how do we improve, or how do we create a globalized campus? Well, the first thing is maybe to really look at the curriculum. The current curriculum in most institutions of higher learning in this country are actually based on a 19th century template, largely formulated in Germany, particularly the social sciences. The breakdown of subjects like sociology, anthropology, political science, economics. I mean, these were formulated in the 19th century to satisfy a sort of view of the world that was emerging, where these, you had separate institutions that were related to these disciplines, but also as a way of professionalizing universities so that people could specialize and make a name for themselves as a sociologist, as an anthropologist. So the first question to ask is whether that kind of specialization, whether that kind of thinking about the world is appropriate for a globalized world. And the way to overcome it is certainly to at least start experimenting with many more cross-disciplinary majors, so that even people in the sciences, particularly people, say, in the life sciences, who may want to work on malaria issues, or who may want to work on animal research in the Congo, are going to be able to take courses in African studies or African anthropology, so that they, as part of their way of globalizing themselves, they step out of here with a good notion of where they might be working. Liberal arts majors need to know how the global economy works, because it could be that nobody in America anymore can think of themselves as having, as saying, I am only going to work in America, I'm never going to work anywhere else. Well, if you have that point of view, you may never work again. It's simply the case that students, particularly now, have to be prepared to move where the jobs are, and the jobs could be in Brazil, they could be in China, they could be in Africa, and to be able to speak the language, to know the culture before you start that job search would be very handy. And also the notion of learning foreign languages is self-evident. I mean, there are immigrant students here who come with a native language, they learn English, they should be required to learn a third language. I mean, it's just simply something that the notion that everybody speaks English is a declining notion, and it doesn't make you any more employable if that's the only the tongue you speak. Now, as far as student life goes, and by student life I mean those things outside of the classroom that people expect from a university, of course study abroad programs are the cornerstone of that, but very limited in terms of creating a globalized student. Very limited because, first of all, they tend to go to boring places like Italy or England, which are not the hotbed of what's happening in the world right now. They also tend to hang out with other Americans because the programs are filled with other Americans. So they live in dorms with other Americans. Their contact, particularly if they're not speaking the local language, is almost nil. So we have to come up with some other way of putting people into the environment. And the way we've decided on campus here is to look for internships for students, to actually find jobs in foreign institutions, whether it be a corporation, an NGO, anywhere that a student can get on an airplane, even if it's by themselves, and have an experience working and living in a foreign country. And in order to do that, we're trying to raise money to subsidize those internships, because for many students here, that kind of expense is difficult. And so I'm charged with going out to the corporate world, basically, to get them to sponsor it, with the notion that it should be self-evident to them why this kind of experience would be useful, and why our students would be better employees if they have this experience. And if you see me a year from now, I'll tell you how it went, because asking corporate people for money right now is difficult. Service learning. I know there's a service learning initiative on this campus. Service learning is one thing, doing it in Boston is quite another thing, doing it in the Congo, or doing it in Sri Lanka, or doing it even in Afghanistan. I think there are certain students here who don't mind risk, who actually would like to go out and be in a risky environment, and I think the university should support them. As I said, I think we tend to view a college as somehow just a more grown-up high school, and it can't be that way. We've got to break the walls down between us and the world, and give students an opportunity to do what they want to do, not what we want them to do. There was a wonderful thing I heard over the weekend where somebody said, if you look at American grammar schools and high schools, that their students should be considered part of the prison population. And I said, what do you mean by that? But then, they went on to explain how regimented, our education is, that, you don't step out of line, and there's some truth to it, even though it's a little bit cynical. And then finally, the faculty. Obviously, having foreign faculty here is great. Having foreign faculty who could teach in their native language is even greater, assuming that there were students who were able to take it. Our faculty should be encouraged to take sabbatical years abroad, and anything we can do to facilitate an exchange, or to get using technology. I mean, now we can project ourselves anywhere in the world, and I know the University College is really aggressively looking into ways of using technology to expand our product, expand our brand throughout the world. So, in conclusion, again, I'm going to read something, but I wrote this one, and I would like to have just said it extemporaneously, but I can't, so I'll read it. I'll say, we live in a world of barriers. We build borders around countries. We build walls between our institutions and the community they are supposed to serve, whether they be corporations or universities. And even within institutions, there are walls not only to provide for specialized distribution of knowledge and know-how, but also more venal reasons of protecting trust, protecting turf and ruling franchises. But is this how it has to be? UMass Boston has Boston in its name, but does it really have Boston in its future? Architecturally, as I said, our campus has already turned its back on the hub, even while it looks out at the sea and the world beyond. Because global means thinking global, and for most of us that will require a great deal of will, courage, and resourcefulness. We have to re-engineer ourselves to live in a world that has already changed. It's not the world that's coming, it's the world that we are already living in. But we seem to be, have our foot off the accelerator at the moment. So the question is, will we embrace and prosper in it, or will we sit by and just let it happen? And each of us has to make that choice for themselves. So thank you very much. I enjoyed your company.